Good morning, everyone. My name is Wayne Stolt, and I'm happy to be here. I'm here with my friend Scott, and we want to speak to you about what it means to share the gospel with your neighbor, okay? Specifically, I wanted to start and talk about today the American dream, because I thought that's a really important issue and what that looks like, because traditionally we've looked at how people have come through Ellis Island and they've come to and had this great idea of what it means to make something of themselves. And so I really want to address this issue. Is this concept still alive, and does it have validity? And is it still true for people to come here from especially parts of the central of the other Americas, Central America, South America? And how do we perceive those people that do so? So I wanted to dive right into this issue of the validity of the American dream still today. In 1931, the historian James Truslow Adams coined the phrase the American dream. Adams speaks about the chance to overcome barriers in social class, to become the best that we can be. He acknowledged that the United States didn't fully live up to that, but he argued that America came closer than anywhere else in the world. And that's a real grand statement, that though we may not meet up to that full-fledged aspect of it, but we meet up to that standard better than many other nations. The American dream is a constant reminder that America's true nature and distinctive grandeur is in promising the common man, the man on the make, a better chance to succeed here than common men enjoy anywhere else on earth. So that's another statement about the American dream that I thought was pretty powerful, and one that's been a long-standing view here in the States. Here's an issue I thought was interesting, that oftentimes we as independent people can come to the States, and people have come traditionally and continue to come, and they want to do it on their own, and that they pick themselves off their bootstraps, pick up this attitude and be able to go out and do things, and they can do it on their own, and they can make it happen. So oftentimes this is something that we see. This gentleman, the famous Thurgood Marshall, none of us get where we're solely by pulling ourselves by our bootstraps. We get there because somebody, a parent, a teacher, maybe some type of mentor brought us there, okay? So really a solid idea that we want to be able to do it on our own, but oftentimes we get some assistance from somebody else here in the States. Is the American dream met today? How do we feel about that? What do you think? What's God's opinion even on that, the American dream? Do you think that God, how would God felt when America was made with a blend of immigrants? You know, it's traditionally called the potpourri, and if you look at even certain states, they are known as the blending pot, like New York City. And what does God really feel about the immigrants in general? Okay, so let's take a look at that even further. We're going to read a couple passages in the book of Ruth, one of my new favorite books in the Bible. So let's begin in Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they lived there for about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons, without her 2 sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughter-in-laws prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and she set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughter-in-laws, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to mine. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and then she wept aloud and said to them, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband, even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons. Would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Then Naomi said, "Your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth said, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So that's the first section. And then if we could turn to chapter 2 and look at verses 6 through 12. Verse 6 begins with the foreman. This is how Ruth meets Boaz. Boaz, a local man who has a piece of property. And so the foreman says, verse 6 begins with, the foreman replied, "She is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and wherever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the waters jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz said, "I have told you all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord. May the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of the servant girls." So we'll stop there. Some pretty interesting material dialogue going on there between Boaz and Ruth, and even earlier between Ruth and Naomi. So to summarize, we see a family together and then torn asunder. Earlier, we saw that Naomi and her husband, her two sons, then they married two Moabite women, and they were a fairly extended family that did well together in this other country, in Moab. Yet then we see that Naomi accepts her daughter-in-law, and they return to Israel. And we saw that because of there was more plentiful food, and she was happy to bring her daughter back with her to Israel. They returned to Bethlehem, and the whole town was happy to have them. Ruth, even though a foreigner in a new country, she went to work. She didn't just say, "I'm going to sit at home with her mother-in-law." She went right to work. She was not only accepted among others gleaning the fields, but was actually blessed with the kindness of others. So we see here that she had a great work ethic, and she went right to work, and then because of that, she was accepted and shown kindness by the people around her. Boaz, the man who owned the property, he acted also in kindness. He knew the situation. His men told him about the situation. He understood Naomi was without food, without money, and had very little sustenance for the family to work and handle. So he ensured the safety in the fields from other men. He said to Ruth, stay here and you won't have to worry about other men from other properties. He ensured her ability to glean sufficient amount so that she would have enough to take back with her. Why does he do this? Verse 11 of chapter 2, we see he points out, but Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came with people that you didn't know. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. He understands the situation, and he does this because he has a good heart, and he understands what she's going through and what Naomi's gone through. Boaz explains that he understands what's happened to them, and he wants to help. And so he demonstrates kindness. He clearly wants and feels empathy for the family and specifically for Ruth. But he also sees in her the love that she's demonstrating toward her mother-in-law. In this case, the next question I have is, was Boaz doing God's will? It would be easier to say for him to say to Ruth, she does not belong, and send her away. He could say, go on to another field. I don't want you taking too much of the product of the grain from our field. You don't belong here. It would be simply easy for him to do that, but he didn't. He had a heart of mercy for her and the situation. He could find sympathy in her, but do nothing. He could certainly sympathize and say, I'm not going to do anything. You're not part of my family, my nuclear family, so why should I do anything? Instead, we see elements of integrity in him. He demonstrates as a godly man the kind of mercy and kindness that he shows. He sees her integrity. He takes time to invest in finding out about her. He talks to the workers, he talks to the other people, and finds out what kind of character she has. He acts on it. So my question is does God expect this in us today? Does he expect us to behave in this manner? Does he expect us to demonstrate the love and kindness that Boaz in this instance did? And I would suggest, yes, he does. God does expect us as followers of Christ to demonstrate the life and to demonstrate God and to demonstrate the kind of life that Jesus would have us walk. So some of the things we would be expected to show kindness and mercy to those around you. In the Old Testament, they would the prophets called these people aliens, foreigners. Jesus, on the right-hand column, you'll see, I want to speak to that first. In the Old Testament, God the Father in the Old Testament, he expected the people to provide for the aliens. There's a couple different instances in the Old Testament, but oftentimes he said, let's make sure we provide for them, to be just to them and be charitable, and to show them mercy and justice. In Deuteronomy 24, 17, and 18, we can look and turn there. So let's look at that for just a moment. Deuteronomy 24, 17, and 18. Do not deprive the alien or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. The Lord your God redeemed you from there. This is what I command you to do. So here God is mentioning to the people in Deuteronomy that they need to show mercy to those who need mercy. And that included widows, that included orphans, and specifically those people who are not part of this land and they were foreigners. And he reminds them that at one point you were foreigners, that you were foreigners in Egypt, and I brought you out of that land. In Deuteronomy 10, 17 to 19, if we turn there, he goes on to say, again, this is Moses talking in Deuteronomy, but in Deuteronomy 10, 17 through 19, it says, For the Lord your God is God of all gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no brides. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the alien, giving him food and clothing. And you are to love those who are aliens, for yourselves were aliens in Egypt. Fear the Lord your God and serve him. Hold fast to him and take your oaths in his name. So here another depiction that where God is actually commanding his people to love the orphan, to love the widow, and specifically love the alien, the foreigner. So that's not an easy pill for us to swallow, because we have been ingrained for many of us that we need to understand that people from other nations may have different cultures and may not fit in line with our same value systems. But here we see God demonstrating to his people that they need to demonstrate love to people. In Deuteronomy 31, 10 through 13, we can turn there in the back of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy 31, verse 10 through 13. Then Moses commanded all of them at the end of every 7 years and the years for canceling debt, during the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, you shall read this law before them in this hearing. Assemble the people, men, women, children, and the aliens living in your town, so they can listen to fear the Lord your God and follow carefully all the words of this law. So not only did God command the Israelites to demonstrate love to the alien, but also to include them in their faith and to include them when the word was spoken in the tabernacle. So it wasn't just a matter of tolerance, but it was also a matter of inclusion, that they are included in the same faith, that what's important to the most important, how they demonstrate their worship to God. If we go on and look in the New Testament, we see Jesus demonstrating, reaching out to foreign people. The Roman centurion, remember, he healed the Roman centurion and his daughter, and the Roman centurion had a sufficient faith that all he asked was Jesus to speak the word, and he knew that Jesus would heal his daughter. And yet, the Roman knew that Jesus wasn't part of, the Roman centurion heard about this and he had faith. He knew that speaking and praying to the Roman gods wasn't going to be enough. And perhaps he'd already tried that and he didn't see any results from that. And here, Jesus healed his daughter on the spot. Jesus also visited the Samaritan woman at the well. Remember, he was intentional. He went out of the way and walked with his disciples to that spot, knowing in mind that he was going to have a conversation with this woman that was going to have an impact, such an impact she would speak to all the people in her. Jesus and the Canaanite woman in Matthew 15, 21 through 28. So all three of these speak to the fact that Jesus was certainly willing to speak to the foreigner. Do you make an effort to show love by trying to share the gospel of Jesus with somebody who's a foreigner? Do you even consider that? We were told by Jesus to go out and share the gospel. That was his last words, if you remember that at the end of Matthew, that we are told to do that. So have you considered that? And when you see somebody that's a foreigner, do you consider how you can share the gospel with them? How do we as Christians view others around us? People at the store, in the park, when we're walking or exercising on the street, or at the bank. What did Jesus do with the outcast? If you work with people that are from another country, do you get frustrated that they don't speak enough English well enough? It's interesting to me, in my first marriage, my first wife might walk into a store and she would be very frustrated if she heard someone speaking around her that spoke from another language, and she was like, they ought to learn English. Okay? But then it was ironic to me that a month later she'd be with her mother and she was a Greek, and she would say in Greek and be talking about someone else in Greek, and she thought that was okay. So there was a double standard there that somehow we Americans allow for, and we need to get past that and understand that, there's a certain, people come here to the States with their own culture, and we can allow a certain amount of people enjoying their own culture, but, still share love with them. Are you patient with people with broken English? My wife now is from South America, and Patricia is her name, and when she goes somewhere, so oftentimes people have very little patience. And she's tried to articulate something with them, and they just give up and throw up their hands and say, well, you don't know English well enough. I'm not going to further any conversation with you. And that's not the attitude we want to have. You know, we need to figure out a way that we can go out of our way to demonstrate kindness and love and be more patient with people. Consider the fruit of the Spirit, where Paul reminds people to show tolerance and to show love and to show kindness. So how can you do that with the people around you? Do you, if you know somebody that's trying to learn English, do you kindly correct them, or do you have an attitude and say, well, you know, that's not how you pronounce that? Do you encourage people that are around you and say, you're doing a good job, continue on this route? Or on the flip side, do you doubt someone's stability that they should even be in our country? When you see somebody that looks like they're foreigner, do you think to yourself, I wonder if they're here legally? And do you wonder, how soon would they go back? Does that affect how you express yourself to them? Are you going to look at them and say, well, I don't know, I'm not even going to talk to them because they don't even, probably shouldn't even be here. They're probably here illegally. Or maybe they're on a visa and they need to hurry up and go back to their own country. Do you consider asking about their home country? Is it beautiful? Does it have special things about it? I know some of my friends, you know, when I say, well, tell me about your city or where you're from, you know, and they tell me, I'm like, wow, that sounds beautiful. Do you think about breaking down words and walls and bridging cultural differences? Do you say to yourself, hey, let's talk? And even though they may have differences, maybe they're Muslim, or maybe they're steeped in Catholicism, or you know, when I visited Guatemala, we had people that were steeped in a blend of Catholicism and old Indian religion, and it was hard to even consider having a conversation with them. But, you know, that was the thing to do. How can you be Jesus to these people around you? You know, and do you get frustrated, and you need to think to yourself, how can I get past this so that I can share Jesus, the joy I have of Jesus? And sometimes as people, they have this preconception that we as Christians, especially Protestant Christians, they think, oh, you know, you're going to behave a certain way, and you're a conservative, so you don't want to listen to me, or you don't want to talk to me. And we need to get past that somehow. So I really wanted to just stress that this is something that we need to look at how we can do. What can you do today and tomorrow when you move forward? And I'd really like you to think about that, pray about that. When you go interact with people in your sphere, in your environment around you, how can you do that? What can set you apart? If you walk into a store and the cashier is from another land, what can you do to demonstrate Jesus to them? How can you show kindness and love? And then maybe you could look at demonstrating and saying something like, hey, let me tell you about what Jesus means to me. And maybe you can hand them a tract. Or maybe you go to a restaurant and your server is from another land. What can you do differently? Okay? I just wanted to mention, it's a non-selfish plug. I've written a novel that really addresses this issue, and it follows the story of two young gentlemen that come to America, and they get a job, and they work in a restaurant. And then they interact with missionaries from the local area, and they meet them. And the missionaries, one of them, they demonstrate kindness and love to them. And then one of them actually chooses to become a Christian. And so that doesn't always happen, but that's what we're called to do. And this, to me, is a great story of how we as Christians ought to interact with people and put aside our differences and look at how, not assume that everybody here that comes here is illegal, and put aside those differences and share the love of Jesus with them. That we don't condone any choices people have made, just like with any other sin, but look at how we can share Jesus with them. You can find my novel on Amazon, or you can see me about a copy. And I also do some blogging about some of these issues. Okay? Thank you for your time. I'd like to now say that my friend Scott Cherry, who's a local missionary in Dearborn, and he works on campuses of mostly U of M Dearborn, sometimes Henry Ford, and sometimes Wayne State. He's going to come and share some time with you. Also, and we'll, if you could warmly share your ears with him. Thank you.